to all who are joining us here at this special Durham City Council and Durham Housing Authority Board of Commissioners meeting on this Monday, April the 11th, 2022, here at 1 p.m. For those who are joining us, I think all of us are virtual at this point. I'd like to say welcome to you all. This is my first meeting of this joint board, and I'm glad to see many people I know and a few I don't. So I am going to turn it over to someone who probably knows everybody here at this point, and that will be longtime Durhamite and public servant, Mr. Dan Hudgens. Hi, Dan.
Hey, hi, Mayor. I get to call you that now. And first of all, I just want to say that I appreciate this opportunity. It's been years since we've had one of these joint meetings, and I hope that this will be the first of several we'll have. And I just want to take just a very few minutes and let the council, and for you, and you may know of most of these folks because the council does appoint all 7 of us that are commissioners. We don't have that many opportunities to get together. So I'm going to briefly introduce myself. And I do know most everybody, I think, on tonight. I've been in Durham for 44 years now and was director of Department of Social Services 27 years. And we certainly had interactions then in an earlier role that you had with the court when I was with the ESS. So it's a pleasure to be back and working together again. And then I went to the university and taught for 11 years. And at the end of that time, I was appointed to this board in 2000, and I guess it was 2014. So I'm approaching about 8 years on the board. But I'd next like to introduce our vice chair, Mamie Webb Bledsoe, and she is a Durham person. So I think she probably knows as many people, maybe more than I do here. So I'm going to let her briefly introduce herself, and we'll move down the list.
Thanks, Dan. Hello, everyone. And yes, I am a Durhamite. Glad to be here with you. I currently work in a position at Duke that allows me to work primarily in the sector of housing. Love it and look forward to having more of an opportunity to do that with the Durham Housing Authority as well as other kind of neighborhood work. So just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to meet and see everyone. And I'll pass it on to Christine Westfall, who's
Great.
Next.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mamie. I'm Christine Westfall. I've lived in Durham for 25 years, which is the longest I've ever lived anywhere. So I'm a Durhamite too. I love Durham. Mostly lived in downtown area neighborhoods. I, for many years, worked for a nonprofit that developed affordable housing, and then I became an independent consultant, and now I'm a developer of housing for the missing middle, focusing on areas where subsidized housing leaves off, and really very excited about DHA's long-term plans with the city for redeveloping mixed-income communities. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go to Bo Glenn, who has as much service on this board as all the rest of us put together. So I think when he finishes up, he'll be able to, this term, he'll have 30 years and he can retire, I think, then. But Bo is our institutional memory. And he's been through a lot. So he knows HUD well. He's a real wonderful resource. But he also chairs our operations committee, which really provides oversight for all of our programs. So, Bo, you want to give a little background too?
Thank you, Dan. As Dan mentioned, my name is Bo Glenn, and I practiced law in Durham for 30-some years with Glenn Mills, Fisher, and Mahoney. And then when I retired, I focused my time on issues involving homelessness, including lack of affordable housing and lack of affordable and adequate transportation. I've served over 20 years as a volunteer in various capacities in urban ministries. I returned to the DHA board, and as Dan mentioned, I'm in my 27th year. I also served as chair of the Homeless Services Advisory Committee and co-chair of the Special Transportation Advisory Committee, and then as a co-founder of the Affordable Coalition of Affordable Housing and Transit. And I'm just, as I tell everybody I can, I'm so excited with the relationship between the city and DHA, which I think, having been a part of DHA since the mid 80s, this is probably the best relationship we've ever had, and I'm really pleased with that. So thank you for meeting with us.
Terrell Armstrong is next to you in my blocks here, so I'm going to move, and he is our treasurer, and a good place to use his skills. So I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself.
Yeah, my name is Terrell Armstrong, and Dan says treasurer. I'm actually the chair of the finance committee. I've been on the board. I'm the treasurer of our church, First Presbyterian Church.
Right.
So
Our church too.
Yeah, but I've been on the board of commissioners since I think it's August or September of 2020. So haven't been around terribly long. But I am an accountant by trade, a CPA here in North Carolina, and currently work at Cisco. I've been at Cisco for, I think it's about 7 years now, maybe, yeah, 7 years. Have been in Durham for about 16 years now, just about 16 years. Originally from Syracuse and actually grew up in public housing. So this is an area near and dear to my heart. Helped to raise me, and was glad to be able to be involved on the board to help the betterment for the residents.
Right. Thank you. And next to you on my screen here is someone I've known for years, Pebbles Lucas, who is a minister, and I'm gonna let her tell you a little bit more about herself, because I'm not sure I can even remember all the degrees she has at this stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our mayor and to the city council and to Mr. Hudgens. I am a new board member for Durham Housing Authority. I think I just celebrated 1 year in January. I am just really happy to be a part of the board. I am from Durham. I was born in Duke Hospital, so I've been here all of my life. So I'm a true Durhamite. I have had an opportunity to catch the bus from school to school, from Durham Tech to North Carolina Central to Duke University. Had to drive to UNCW though, that was pretty far. But I'm just happy to be able to offer my gifts, because I was a single parent who had a son who is now managing clinics at UNC Hospital. But we were on Durham Housing Authority for a couple of years. And I'm just glad to be here now, because I can offer my experiences with the residents, as well as, just go out in the community and just walk among the people. And so I'm just very proud and just thankful to be a part of this organization. And I want to thank you, Mr. Hudgens, and those of you who allowed me to have this opportunity to go back and serve in this capacity. I'm married to Reverend Lucas. We've been in this community, Hayti community, serving in a low income area. I am a Durham pre-K teacher right now. And so I'm serving the babies. I'm with them every single day. They call my name like 100 times a day. But I'm just grateful to be here. And congratulations to Mayor Elaine O'Neill. Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. And last but certainly not least is our newest member, Angela Holmes. And I want to let Angela introduce herself too, because she brings some unique experience that this board needs. You may be on mute. I think you may be on.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's all right.
I'm in a training right now, so I had to run outside and do this real quick.
Thank you.
I'm Angela Holmes. I hail from West Virginia. My family roots are from Durham, North Carolina. My grandmother's born and raised here, and all my other relatives, going all the way up to Lebanon Township, into Roxborough, the East Durham, and other areas. So my family, I used to have speak with Skippy Scarborough, he would show me letters that, a letter that Booker T. Washington wrote to his grandfather. And that's when they were doing a tribute to Booker T. Washington at the Hayti Center. And I got up and spoke because Booker T. Washington is one of my relatives, as well as the Wright brothers. My grandmother, great-grandmother, is from the Wright brothers family. My dad has fond memories of his grandmother. Says she was a white lady with freckles on her face, with long red hair. And that's why I remember her being a school teacher, making sure he wrote his name correctly. And my dad writes very, very neatly. But with me, I've been working with the homeless agencies. I have been, before that, I was a property manager over there near Northgate Mall for a little while. And I was on the board of directors of Urban Ministries. I have been a mediator with the Dispute Settlement Center. I work with the city, with the Homeless Planning Committee when they do the events at the ballpark. I got all the beauticians and barbers to come to the ballpark, and then I turned it over to a beautician, and then I took over with the donations and giveaways. I've been on the ASOC committee as a chair and a vice chair of that. I'm currently on the board of Housing for New Hope, and I worked at a little group gathering with families moving forward to encourage women to talk about what they're doing and try to get them to different committees to the city. I am a mother of 7, and all have thankfully graduated high school. My last child is a sophomore at Winston-Salem State. Y'all have to excuse me, I got 7 children. She was at Winston-Salem State. And I'm currently working at Entry Point. So anyone that's homeless or about to be homeless, they will call, and we'll try to do a diversion for them with some type of way, or try to get them on a waiting list or referral to VFF or Families Moving Forward or street outreach. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I think you can tell that we've got a wealth of experience, and I'm talking about varied experience on the board. But 3 of our board members have experienced services from our agency. So I think, or from a public housing. In case of Mr. Armstrong, it was in New York. But I think that's unique to this board in terms of the amount of experience they bring in that area. And I think, if you can tell from what Ms. Holmes, Ms. Lucas, and the others have said, that they also, and Ms. Westfall being involved in development too. So we've got a lot of experience. So that was what I wanted to start with. I'm not sure where you want to go next, but Mr. Scott's going to speak for us at this meeting and has prepared a presentation.
All right.
So turn it back to you, Mayor.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to recognize my council as well, and I'm going to ask if they will have a few remarks and start with our Mayor Pro Tem Mark Anthony Middleton, and I'll ask you to pass it over to the other council folk in the view. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, Chair Hudgens. Good afternoon to all of the board and my fellow colleagues, Mark Anthony Middleton, Mayor Pro Tem, City of Durham. Glad to be here. I think this is an important gathering for us, for the city as well. So I'm looking forward to a really substantive conversation. Thank you, ma'am. Good to see you all.
I'll see now Councilwoman Caballero, and then we'll ask Councilwoman Freeman if she will follow her. And I think those are all the council. If you all see anyone else, if you would pass it, and then I'll just have a few brief remarks before we go right into our robust agenda. Councilwoman Caballero.
Thank you, Mayor O'Neill. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be with you all. Look forward to the conversation and glad that we were able to gather today.
Councilwoman Freeman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councilmember Freeman, glad to be here as well. I appreciate the history that the board has shared that they hold, and look forward to hearing more.
So we have various, I think, other officials from the city as well. Just want to take time out for them to raise their hands, virtual hands, so you'll see who they are from the city. And I also see others from DHA as well. We have our city manager, our chief of staff, our city manager, various folk, Keith Chadwell, Karen Lato. We are representing today, so thank you all for being here. And I'd also offer that opportunity to those who are affiliated with DHA as well. If you raise your virtual hands, let everybody see you, and we will move right along into our agenda. Thank you all. We have a great group. We have about 49 people here today. So we're happy to start with our City of Durham update, which is going to be given by Mr. Reginald Johnson, who is the director of our community development department. Mr. Johnson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, everyone. Reginald Johnson, Director of the Department of Community Development. It's great to be here with you all. I'll take a few minutes of your time just to share a brief update of where we are from the city's perspective in our partnership with the Durham Housing Authority. I would say that we have, as been mentioned earlier by Chair, that we do have a good relationship. We've worked at it. It's not without its faults. It's not perfect, but one of the things we are committed to here at the city is to support the housing authority as best we can, and we work through that through the community development department. I'm joined this afternoon by some team members from community development. I have Terry Porter Holmes, Assistant Director, Karen Lotto, Assistant Director, Matt Walker, who's our Senior Project Manager and Team Leader. He works primarily with the Housing Authority, our primary point of contact. I also have Matthew Snars, who's our Planning and Performance Manager, and Albert Avery, who's a Senior Business Services Manager, has also joined us from Community Development. What I'm going to do is share with you a brief PowerPoint, won't be too elaborate, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I'll share my screen. And with us being in COVID, look like I'll be able to do that real quick. All right, here we go. All right. All right. Okay, here we go. All right. So like I said, we have a great partnership with the Housing Authority. And we're pleased to work with the Housing Authority and to support its work and help us with our goals with the City of Durham in terms of the creation, preservation of affordable housing and provide housing opportunities for those who are formerly homeless or homeless. What I'm going to just do is go over a brief outline of affordable housing development and preservation, talk about Forever Home Durham and other development, and then talk about homelessness and stand for any questions that either I or members of the team will be glad to answer for you at the appropriate time. Just to refresh everybody's memory, I'm sure you're familiar with the bond referendum that the voters in Durham passed, $95 million. We also put the partner that, or paired that with 5 years of funding from our entitlement programs with HUD, as well as local dollars that the 2 cents on the tax rate that the City Council has approved for the dedicated housing fund to build a $160 million multi-year investment in affordable housing and services for low-income Durham residents. And the goals of that investment are to build 1,600 new affordable rental homes and preserve 800 affordable homes, provide 400 affordable home ownership opportunities for first-time home buyers, move 1,700 homeless persons into permanent housing, and help 3,000 low-income renters and homeowners remain in or improve their homes, and create at least $130 million in contract opportunities for minority and women-owned business enterprises. Now, of this list of clearly Housing Authority is a critical partner in number one, building the 1,600 new affordable rental homes, as well as the preservation. Also, critical partner in moving 1,700 homeless persons into permanent housing. And of course, because of the work that the Housing Authority is doing, is critical also in the creation of $130 million of contracted opportunities for MWBEs. So just to refresh everybody's memory and recollection of the $95 million bond referendum, affordable housing bond referendum, $59 million of that 95 million, it goes to support the gap financing for the first 4 phases of Durham Housing Authority's Downtown Durham and Neighborhood Plan, Ddnp, which includes J.J. Henderson, 519 East Main Street and Liberty Street Apartments, the DHA office building in Forest Hill Heights. And in addition, we partnered with DHA on the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative application to support the redevelopment of East Main Street and Liberty Street and the surrounding neighborhood. We also have additional funding as not included in Forever Home Durham to fund repairs and rehabilitation of 3 non-Ddnp properties. That includes McDougal Terrace, which was emergency electrical upgrades, Laurel Oaks, which is rehabilitation of 30 units in the community center, and then Maureen Road, which required some sewer upgrades. And we also provide funding in support of DHA's development team, including partial staff salaries and funding for development consultant and other pre-development expenses, as well as Ddnp relocation expenses. So we do spend some research support on the development side of the Durham Housing Authority. This is a list of the funding commitments. I won't go through each one of those, but you see that the ones funding in Forever Home Durham includes J.J. Henderson Tower Rehab, J.J. Henderson New Construction, Elizabeth Street, Commerce Street, Families and Seniors, and the future Ddnp phases. We also have, that's not in the Forever Home Durham, J.J. Henderson New Construction. We have some additional resources there. And then we also have other development projects that we support with other resources for DHA, including Laurel Oaks, McDougal Terrace that was mentioned, Maureen Road, and you can see the total there is $4.5 million. And then operations grants, relocation grants total about just under $2.7 million. And so you can see at the bottom, the 59 millions and additional about $10 million that we've put in support of the Housing Authority's work. On the homelessness front, which is another area that the DHA supports and the great partners, we're the lead agency for the continuum of care, and DHA is an institutional member of the Homeless Services Advisory Committee. And DHA operates a Home Again program, which is funded through HUD's annual funding grant for the continuum of care and provides housing for 10 formerly homeless households. DHA provides additional housing and support for persons experiencing homelessness. This includes dedicated 225 housing choice vouchers for persons exiting homelessness. And those vouchers are located by the Durham COC Continuum of Care, committed up to 5% of public housing units for persons exiting homelessness, and then agreed to prioritize 3 to 5% of Ddnp units for persons experiencing homelessness, and manages up to 68 emergency housing vouchers for people exiting homelessness as part of the federal COVID relief efforts. And the city partners with DHA and Durham County Social Services on HOPWA activities, and DHA manages the HOPWA funded tenant-based rental assistance. So I'll stop there, Mayor, and I just wanted to stand for any questions at the appropriate time. But I just wanted to, as grounding, share that information with the group to remind everybody of the role that we have. And I'll stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much, Reggie. if there are any questions for Reggie, if you would please raise your virtual hand, and Amber and I will try to keep track of that, but I am also looking. Don't see any hands raised. Right. All right. Thank you so much for that presentation and update. I'll now turn to, for the Durham Housing Authority update, and turn to Mr. Anthony Scott, who's our Chief Executive Officer of the Durham Housing Authority. Anthony, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate this opportunity. Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members, and of course, all of my board and staff members. I'm going to also share my screen and provide with a presentation here. So as you'll see, this will be a kind of a lengthy presentation, but some of this is going to be less lengthy. It'll be something that we go through a little faster. Can everyone see my screen yet?
No.
Yeah, not yet.
All right, let me make one adjustment here.
We can see it now. Thank you.
Excellent. One second. So today, my agenda is going, like, as I said, it looks rather lengthy, but towards the end, it's kind of program updates. And from there, we'll be able to move through those slides rather quickly. First, I just want to ground everyone on who and what DHA is. We have three primary programs, one being the public housing program that most people are familiar with, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and the Affordable Housing Program. We combined all three of those for over 4,000 families, and we have about 9,200 plus residents. And here on the bottom, you can see how our public housing, housing choice voucher, and affordable housing families fare with income when it comes to income. The public housing families right now are paying an average of $245 per month in rent, and their average income is $10,000, a little over $10,000. On over to where you see the voucher program and the affordable housing program. Our combined averages are $12,625 and an average rent of $309 per month. Now, I know a lot of numbers, but bear with me on this. This is showing you who lives in our various assisted families, households. And it's a breakdown by age groups. And without you guys getting too focused on all the numbers, just recognize that we have about 42% of all of our DHA residents are 17 and under. And 12% of all DHA residents are 62 and over. So you do see a wide range of households that we have. And specifically, I'll point out that in our public housing communities, we have 52% of all residents are actually under 18 years of age. Next up, this talks a little bit about our group of our residents that sometimes get overlooked, and that's the disabled households that we have. Overall, we have 12% of our households who are between 18 and 54 that are disabled, and head of households. And you see 19% of our head of households are over 62 years of age and disabled. But also 9% are 55 to 61. And what this tells us is that even though we'll see things like high unemployment rates, we also have to keep in mind that many of our families, in fact, are disabled, and so that will restrict their ability for full-time employment or viable employment, because we do have quite a few of our households. Basically, 40% of all of our households are, in fact, head of households are, in fact, disabled. So this will have an impact on a lot of our families and their abilities to seek and maintain employment. I think I'm stuck here. There we go. So with that understanding about sort of who many of our families are, I wanted to, again, talk about what our challenges are. These are challenges that you've all heard. They have not changed dramatically. They have changed some in terms of what we've been dealing with because of the pandemic, but we're still dealing with a lot of these challenges. It's no secret today that across the country, you hear about the Great Resignation, I think they've dubbed it now, with respect to labor. We are no strangers to that. In fact, I'd say we were ahead of the curve around the challenges with labor. But as you can see, we have about a third of our full-time positions are currently unfilled. We do have temps that are working in most of those positions, but we still are struggling with finding full-time qualified employees for many of our 92 positions. Specifically in the property management area, we see that 11 vacancies for the 42 positions that we have there exist right now. In 2021, like many companies, we saw a lot of turnover, and much of this is factoring in the turnover that we had with the temps, but we had about 35% turnover in 2021. The challenge around finding qualified contractors remains an issue. We were able to get one qualified contractor after advertising twice. We had to actually go to HUD and ask for a special dispensation so that we would be allowed to use that one contractor, in which they agreed to do. But this one contractor has been very, very instrumental in us getting caught up in our huge backlog of work orders. And then lastly, of course, funding is always a challenge for us, and it is going to have an impact on our ability to do a lot of the repair work that's necessary. We are going to be utilizing our capital funds to address a lot of our repairs, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. On the plus side, even though we've been struggling with hires, some of our hires that we have made have been actually very good additions to our team. For example, we've hired 3 key positions at the senior team level. Our director of housing operations has been excellent in turning around that area. We have a new staff attorney, and we also have now a communications manager, and that is Dominique Dunn, Jason Brenner, and Alea Sanders, respectively. These are all been critical positions being filled, have made a huge difference in us being able to address some of our overall business issues, as well as dealing with the big challenge of having folks who couldn't afford to pay their rent during the pandemic and being able to communicate the messages around that. Our work orders, we implemented a single call line for all work orders. That has been working out very, very well. And also on the work order front, we've been able to tackle significantly when we were at a high of some 1,600 work orders that we were backlogged in. That number is down now to less than 13 for work orders that are more than 30 days old. And overall, we've improved a lot on some of our systems, our operation systems, and our finance office has been completely restructured, and it is moving forward accordingly. And I'll pause here to see if there's any quick questions on anything that we talked about thus far. All right, I'm gonna keep it moving. Next, I want to talk about our recovery agreement. This is something that we were required to do because we are, as you all are aware, we are a troubled agency. This goes back to the 2018 fiscal year, which was the last time that HUD has done an assessment of housing authorities. This is nationally, not just us, primarily because of the pandemic that began in 2020. The system called the Public Housing Assessment System is where and how we are graded as a housing authority. It has 4 basic categories: financial, management, which is overall management, our physical inspections of our properties, and then management of our capital funds. It's based on a 100-point scale. And as been talked about in the past, we are at 59, so we're 1 point below where we should be with respect to being considered a standard performing housing authority. As I mentioned, the last time we've had a score was in the year 2018, which was done in 2019. All FAS scores have been stopped since then. HUD is now starting the FAST process again, so we will be scored for 2021. As a result of that designation, we are required by HUD to execute a recovery agreement. This recovery agreement was executed in February of this past couple of months ago, actually. And it outlines specific accomplishments that we have to adhere to and accomplish within a particular time frame. There are three basic things that we are required to address. One, we have to increase our occupancy to at least 95%. Two, we have to improve our unit conditions to that minimum passing score of 60. And we have to remove the McDougal Terrace public housing community from our public housing inventory. All this must be done according to HUD in the next 2 years. Talk about these in a little more detail. With respect to the increase in our occupancy needs to be at least 95%. And that's a cumulative total over the course of the entire year. It's not where we need to be at the end of the year, but we need to have an average of 95% occupancy throughout the entire year. So just to kind of use a simple example to explain this process called units months leased, it is if we had 1,000 units and there are 12 months, you multiply those two together, you get 12,000 unit months. We have to be at least 95% occupied of those 12,000 unit months or 11,400 unit months. So this basically breaks down to being, we can have no more than an average of 50 vacant units per month on average. And this is an important difference in looking at the overall year versus where you are at the end of the month, because our unit count kind of goes up and down throughout the year, because sometimes we might have, say we had a fire at a unit, well, that unit comes offline until that repair is done. So that'll be deducted from that unit months category based on the number of months it's been offline. So it is really kind of a truer measure of what your true vacancy is. Currently, we're at 94% year to date, and we do have some work to do with HUD to show our numbers are the same as their numbers. Some of the things that we show HUD's system for some reason or the other is not showing as being offline or online. So those are some of the things that we'll be working through with our friends from HUD. Moving to item 2, which is improve unit conditions. Those are based on an inspection each year. And that's called a REAC, which is REAC, stands for Real Estate Assessment Center. And they inspect our units based on these 5 categories. Basically your site, your building exterior, your building systems, your common areas, and the unit conditions themselves. We are typically hit on the site and unit conditions over the last few years. That has been our challenge. It is no secret considering some of the things that we've seen within our units. And we have focused a lot of energy and attention on making sure that we address the major health and safety issues within our units, and spent a lot of time over the last year or so doing that. The inspections have in fact begun for some of our units, and I'll talk about them in a second. But as a result of what we have seen preliminarily, our site and unit scores are still low. We expected, frankly, to see lower site scores because we've been really focused on the unit conditions and doing the work there. But unfortunately, our unit conditions has not necessarily reflected the millions of dollars that we spent on repairs. And to some degree, that's not a big a surprise. It is a bit of a surprise considering what we have done, but the way the scoring system works, sometimes minor things will be considered pretty big hits for the score. We do expect, however, that we can make greater progress on this as the year goes on. Our physical needs assessments are currently underway. And this is where we contract with an independent third party. They come into the units, not all, but they do a sampling of the units at each particular property and make a determination of how much of capital expenditures you need to do over a 20-year period. And they break this up into 5-year increments. The 5-year increments ties directly to how we budget our capital funds. So we budget our capital funds in 5-year increments as well. So this will determine how we will spend our capital funds over the course of that 5-year period. That's going to be critical for us to address the repair issues that we talked about previously. This is built into our recovery agreement as well, that we have to do a physical needs assessment. Based on those physical needs assessments, we then will program what repairs we'll do over the next 5 years, based on not necessarily what the costs are of all of those capital needs, but based on what your budget is. So that's a little bit of a disconnect with our friends at HUD, but that is in fact what we have to deal with, because our funding is not nearly enough to cover the many issues that we see in our units. And again, you know, a lot of the things that I talk about are not unique to Durham. These are issues that exist throughout the country at all housing authorities. So on an improvement, continue on our improving our unit conditions, each property must have that minimum score of 60. As I said, it's based on those 5 categories. If we do not have, if a property falls below that minimum score of 60, then we are required to do third-party property management and have that in place by June 30th of 2023. In addition to the individual properties, the cumulative total of all of our properties has to be at least 60 as well. So far, they have started inspections for 3 properties, Cornwallis, Oxford, and Club Boulevard. And the preliminary numbers show that all 3 of those sites have failed. We still have to scrub those numbers a little bit more, but I'm sharing with you all now that preliminarily it looks like the 3 of these sites have in fact failed those scores. We'll be digging into those a little bit more in detail, because some of those things we do not agree with. For example, we were being scored on FHEO, fair housing accessibility, where we have buildings that as old as they are, we can't be expected to have ramps at every single unit. That should have been grandfathered in, but yet we were still scored on inaccessible units. So there are some small things like that, but it's still going to be an uphill battle, and not very likely, based on these scores, that these properties will in fact pass their minimum standard of 60. Be able to give you updates on that in the coming weeks.
And a peer support specialist. So a recovery coach is anyone interested in the barriers and obstacles.
Sorry, is that a question or some background?
I think there may be some background from.
Okay, I'll press on that. Next is our approved unit conditions. Next is our McDougal Terrace property. As I mentioned, HUD is requesting us to reposition McDougal Terrace, meaning taking it out of its public housing inventory. And that has a range of options in terms of what that means. It means you could do something like a Rad conversion and try to renovate those units, all the way to tearing down and rebuilding. The analysis of what we're going to do with that site is going to be forthcoming. We have a plan to submit to HUD. Our date for that is in February of 2023. We're going to begin that work in the coming weeks. We're going to start first and foremost by having a meeting with our McDougal Terrace residents to talk about all of what this means and how it's going to impact them, inclusive in that plan that we provide to HUD, because no matter what we do, we know we have to move people out of those units to do work. If we're going to rehab, obviously we'll move them out permanently if we're going to tear it down. And so we want to make sure that we are clear in discussing this with our residents so they know what the process is. As you all know, the last time I talked about this, the media jumped out way ahead and caused a panic throughout the community. So we want to make sure that first and foremost, we have that conversation with our residents, and that's scheduled in the coming weeks. One of the things that we know we'll do for sure is that we'll look to incorporate the Lincoln Apartments, which is owned by DHA, as a part of that effort to reposition that McDougal Terrace community. We are expecting, I talked about the physical needs assessments a little earlier, we're expecting to get the finalized numbers on that in the coming days. These are preliminary numbers that we've seen so far. I've highlighted and italicized that for a reason. I want to make sure that folks don't get too excited one way or the other about what these numbers show. But I wanted to at least alert you that The preliminary numbers show that we have about $53 million of need over the next 20 years in McDougal Terrace, including $2 million immediately that's in need there. So again, I'm not prepared to get into the details of what all those are now, because we've just literally, like in the last day, we've gotten some of this information. And so we have to have a little more discussion with that vendor to determine what this looks like and what this means in more detail. And we'll be able to come back to you and share with you all what this means for McDougal Terrace. But if you take these numbers on face value and you think about what this means, $53 million over 20 years of need. If that is in fact true, the $15 million that we will have in our capital fund over the next 5 years will just barely be able to address McDougal during that time. And this is part of the mismatch that we have in the public housing world, where you have a capital fund program that severely underfunds what the actual capital need is based on a HUD process, meaning this physical needs assessment process is driven by HUD. It's the way it's determined is determined by HUD. But historically, what we've seen as housing authorities, and again, I'm talking about my colleagues across the country, is that the physical needs assessment does not nearly capture all of the costs that are necessary to make those units and bring those units to the kind of condition we don't like to see. So it is a challenge here with dollars from that perspective. But again, we have a lot of work to do on this, and we're just now at the early stages of beginning this. I'm going to pause actually to see if there are any questions on what I've covered so far with the recovery agreement.
I did see a couple of hands raised, Mr. Scott. I'm not sure if they're still up. I'm going to scroll through. Lisa did come up. Any questions thus far? I don't see those hands raised any longer, so you keep going.
Okay, will do.
Madam Mayor, I see a couple of hands raised. I see Ms. Wagstaff's and Mr. Roberson's. I don't know if you can see them in the.
No, I can't. So if you can keep up with that, Mayor Pro Tem, that would be great. And I do see there is a question in the chat. So
yes, ma'am.
You said Ms. Wagstaff, followed by Mr. Roberson, and we have also a question in the chat.
Yes, ma'am. That's what I see.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. Wagstaff. Ms. Wagstaff, you will have the floor for your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I really was trying to get more information on this whole McDougal Terrace repositioning. So there's, at no time is there going to be any discussion about rehabilitation, rehab in McDougal. It's going to be total tear down, if I'm not clear.
Right. So what I said is that we're starting with meeting with our residents, and we haven't made a determination yet of what will happen at McDougal Terrace, because there's still a lot of work to do, including getting the finalized physical needs assessment and then looking at what those costs would be. So that's all part and parcel to what we have to do over these next coming months.
Okay, so that conversation, so in other words, will that part of that conversation be the amount of money that has already been spent in McDougal to try to alleviate the problem that they had 2 years ago with the displacement, with the carbon monoxide and the replacement of equipment and all of the things that were supposed to have been done to bring those apartments back up to safe occupancy, and then they had to be signed off by the city of Durham. And is that information anywhere available, those sign-offs of those occupancy, once the residents were put back in those apartments?
That's really a city question, because that was done by the city, not by DHA. So with respect to that, I assume you can get that information from them. But that was what was required of us, that we had to have us, well, part of it was required, part of it was what we required. So there's a portion of it Obviously, when it came to the health and safety issues, we made sure that we worked with the city's building department to make sure that those units were appropriately repaired. And then we also work with neighborhood improvement services on additional health and safety issues that were not covered under the things that were part of the whole carbon monoxide issue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think related to that would be the question that's in the chat is when is the meeting with your residents? And that comes from Councilwoman Caballero.
I am not sure exactly what that date is scheduled, but I could get back to all of you and let you know when that is.
And Mr. Robinson, you would now have the floor for your question, sir. Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, yes, we can. Yes, sir.
This question for Mr. Scott. Years ago, I think about 2015, 2014, somewhere in there, when he first became Director of Housing, I spoke to you about renovating the Lincoln apartments, getting the individuals from McDougal to participate in renovating them, where they would have some input in them or have a stake in it. Vested interest. You told me at that time that it was in a watershed area, and I said something to the effect of there's no ordinance about building in the watershed area, and you pretty much flaked me off. I just want to know why did you revisit it now? Is because you feel like maybe that was a great idea or not?
So we would not be able to completely occupy the Lincoln apartments the way they are now because of the watershed area. So not all of Lincoln apartments is in a watershed area, but a portion is. That's what I was referring to when I talked about that. So it's not the entire development is in a watershed area, but a portion is. And so we wouldn't be able to build anything there. So it's not that we have changed our mind. We knew that that was an issue. We just have to solve for what that means, exactly where that 100-year floodplain is. And then anything outside of that is where we would be able to build.
I understand, but I'm just saying, but you knew that then, like you know it now, why didn't you start earlier on? And maybe the catastrophe that occurred in McDougal early on in a couple of years ago wouldn't have occurred like that. That's my issue. Why did you drag your feet? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, when it comes to something like that, you're talking about apartment buildings that have been vacant for years. They have a lot of environmental issues. That's why they've been sitting vacant for as long as they have. In fact, that's why they became vacant originally, as I understand it. So it's not about dragging your feet. It's how do you come up with the funding to develop something like that? It all is going to come down to having the money to renovate or tear down and rebuild those particular buildings. So it's not about dragging the feet. It's always an issue of how do we find all the funding that we're going to need to take on any particular development deal.
But couldn't you have implemented the same plan where you're going to have independent contractors come in and work with DHA back then, just like you can do it now or going forward?
So again, that's going to be part of our overall redevelopment strategy for that McDougal-Terrace area. And whether it's independent contractors or whomever, that'll be determined as we work this out. We just aren't in a position now to say this is what's going to happen with the Lincoln Apartments site. That's the work that we have to do going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Mr. Scott, did you want to continue?
Yes, sir, I will. Get over here. Okay, now we'll move on to the Ddnp or DHA Downtown and Neighborhood Plan. As you know, this was launched formally in really 2017 is when we started our work on this. 17 and all throughout 18 is when we did a variety of community meetings to talk about what could happen on these sites. And given their proximity, we didn't want to do this sort of one site at a time, but to look at this holistically and look at how we could combine this to take full advantage of opportunities. So in total, we have 447 existing units on these sites that consist of 3 senior sites and 1 family site, and 1 vacant site. Also, the DHA office and the county land around the criminal justice building, and 2 city sites. That comprises our Ddnp plan. And what we proposed back in 2019 was new construction and rehab of over 2,450 units. We estimated it would take about 10 years to get this work done, and well over $500 million. And again, there are 8 properties involved in all of that. And Mr. Johnson with CDD covered a lot of this in his presentation. But these were the 7 sites in our development schemes for what we thought was possible on those sites back in 2019. The breakdown of that is, with those 7 sites, we would have about 2,451 units, again, over $500 million of development. And we looked at it in several phases. Those phases are primarily driven by the available funding that's there. The low-income housing tax credit program was a major source for how we would be able to build these developments. And those phases are laid out here to show kind of how we are going to be dealing with that, particularly this 9% category, which is highly competitive. There's 9% that can happen in Durham per year. And just to give a sense of how we are projecting, and we did a lot of homework on this, but it's not guaranteed. And in fact, the J.J. Henderson site, which actually on paper scored as the highest potential site to get 9% funding, when we applied, we didn't get funding that particular year. And that's where Mr. Johnson had mentioned that there was some additional investment in the J.J. Henderson new construction portion of this that allowed us to continue our development activities. So this is where we are today. The J.J. Henderson site, as was mentioned previously, this is the existing building. This building is being completely renovated from top to bottom. And in addition to that, we're building a new construction building on the same physical location that will yield another 80 units. With the J.J. Henderson rehab, it's a total cost of over $32 million. About half of that, $16 million, is actual hard construction that's going into the renovation. So new kitchens and baths, flooring, the brand new HVAC system, community room that'll be shared actually with the new building, and new entranceway and upgraded to the building systems. So these are just a few slides showing you kind of before and after, where you can see the new flooring and window treatment, as well as the new HVAC system. This is giving you a shot of the before and after for the kitchen work that's going on. So all new kitchen appliances, cabinets, flooring. So J.J. Henderson is well on its way right now with the rehab. I believe they are about 60+% complete in their renovation work. This is kind of unique in that the renovation work is going on while residents are still in place. They do a stack of units at a time. And once those are finished, residents move into the completed units, and then they move on to the next group of units. Next, we're going to talk about the J.J. Henderson new construction, which we can stop calling it now. We can call it by its new designated name. It's going to be known as the Joyce. The Joyce is named after Joyce T. Nichols, who was the first Black woman to graduate from Duke's Physician's Assistants program, which is literally across the street. And the Duke Physician's Assistants program is right across the street from this building. And it will be named in her honor, as well as having a community room that tells you more about the history of her and what her great accomplishments were. This will be an 80-unit building, mostly 1-bedrooms and also a few 10s. And with this particular rendering, you can see this is the new construction, and this is the existing J.J. Henderson building kind of poking up from the back there. This is looking down Moorhead Avenue. We're happy to say that the construction is well underway with the Joyce. You can see the progress that's been made there at this particular site. If you want to get a jolt of accomplishments there, please drive by and take a look at the J.J. Henderson site and see the work underway. We are 28% complete as of this week. Our WMBE goal for this was 29%. We are currently at 12% for WMBE and 17% at MBE. The overall construction cost for the Joyce is $19 million. And as Mr. Johnson pointed out, $3 million of that is direct investment from the city of Durham. And this is what the progress looks like to date on that site. So they're now on the first floor and moving quickly. Next, we're going to move down to Liberty Street and East Main Street. This is a 5-phase development. It is the existing Liberty Street apartments and the 519 East Main Street building. It's 214 total units on this site. It'll be reconfigured in this way to have 5 phases. Phase 1 is here, phase 2, etc. Phase 2 and 3. Remember earlier I talked about how these phases are done primarily around how you get funding. Prior to 2020, prior to the pandemic, the 4% tax credit program was one in which you usually use if you had larger projects. There were several new changes to the tax credit program that made a large scale 4% product much more feasible than a 9% product. So for phase 1, we already received our 9% award for that. Phase 2 and 3, both of which we were going to look to do a 9%, but because of the new changes to the 4% low-income housing tax credit program, we're combining this as one overall application, even though it'll be 2 different uses. One building will be family and one will be senior. Excuse me. This is a rendering of the Elizabeth Street Apartments, which is phase 1. This is expected to start construction in third quarter of this year. It'll be 80 units at a cost of about $24 million. And the city contribution to this has been $6 million. This is the Commerce Street Apartments. This is expected to start by first quarter of 2023. And it has a $52 million combined construction cost because remember, this is 2 phases here, phase 2 and phase 3. And the city's contribution at this point is $8 million for this development phase. So now we're going to move to the Ddmp Phase II. Those are the last 3 sites that were part of the Ddmp. They did not have development partners assigned to them. This concludes Forest Hill Heights, Payette Place, and the Dha Office Site. In June of 2021, we issued an RFP, a request for proposals, for those 3 sites. Those proposals were due in September. We had a pre-proposal meeting in July. We had community briefings in July, 3 of them. And we also had a deadline for any questions or feedback that we had in August. And those proposals were received in September. We received 11 qualified proposals submitted by 9 different interested parties. Those proposals were reviewed by an 11-member committee that included 6 DHA staff, 3 city and county staff members, and 2 community members. And in December of 2021, our development partner selection was in fact approved by our board of directors. Those 3 sites will be, the proposals are as follows. The first one here is the DHA office site. This was proposed by the Durham Community Partners, which is led by Greystone and F7 International Development out of Raleigh, and also Gilbane Construction Company, who builds all up and down the East Coast. This plan will yield 258 affordable housing developments, as well as other mixed incomes there, and about 42,000 square feet of new office space plus ground floor commercial. This is proposed at about $84 million. And you can see here in this bottom right, this is the existing criminal justice building. We've partnered with the county to allow us to use their land, which includes this parking structure, to build on so we can expand and maximize the development of this lot. So we can yield the 258 units. We'll have to replace the existing parking that's there, as well as add parking for the needs of this new development. Next is the Payette Place site. This was proposed as having housing in a grocery store back in 2019. The Durham Community Partners also were awarded this project. This would be over 770 units on this site, a cost of about $200 million, including one of the things that the community really wanted to see, a grocery store. They actually have an interested nationally known grocer who's provided a letter of interest for actually having a grocery store on this site. So we're pretty excited about that as well. And the last one is the Forest Hill Heights development. This was awarded to the Integral Group. Some of you may be familiar with them. They're responsible for the development of the Whitted School. They're based out of Atlanta. They are an MBE company. Their proposal is, comes at a cost of $200 million, 700 units in total, 72,000 square feet of commercial space, and 17,000 square feet of open programmable space. I will caution that all of these three proposals are at their preliminary stage at this point. So we have not even begun our negotiations with those development partners. So we do expect to see some changes with these. We'll talk a little bit about why we think some of that is necessary, and we're hopeful for that. But I wanted to first do a little comparison of you all to show you the affordability goals that we had for these three sites. And this is based on our 2019 plan. So it shows that this is the breakdown that we were hoping for, combination of 30% units, 30 to 60, 60 to 80, and then unrestricted. And this is what we have currently now in the three proposals. This is how this breaks down by individual sites. I promise this will probably be my last big number group of numbers for you in all of this. But what this shows you is our overall Ddnp plan. What we proposed in 2019, and this is, I'll just say this, this is only the DHA controlled site. So it does not include the two city sites that were proposed. It's only the DHA sites. So what we proposed back in 2019 was 2,275 units on those three sites in a mix that you see of around, anywhere from 18 to 23%, but sort of spread out amongst those four different categories, right? So with the proposals that we received, and this includes, again, the J.J. Henderson sites, also the three phases of the Liberty and Main Street site, and the proposed sites of the three developers that have been talked about, and site phases 4 and 5 of the Liberty and Main Street site. When you look at all of those proposed sites, the part in green are the only sites that have submitted proposals and are moving forward at this moment in time. But when you factor in the proposed units in the unit mix, you'll see we'll have a net increase of 96 more units at 50% and below. You also notice that we have a net loss of 318 units at the 80% area median income. And this is mostly in this new development group here of these three sites. So lots of work to do there to see if we can get more of those 80% units. Again, this is very early in the stages of this, and we haven't even begun our negotiations with these developers yet. One of the chief issues that we all know is out there is the ongoing spiraling construction cost. This has had a major impact even on the work that we're doing now, particularly in the East Main Street and the Liberty Street proposals. We're seeing major cost increases. Again, all of you are aware of this because it's all over the news. This is going to have a big challenge for us because ultimately, if we're trying to get more affordable units, we're going to need to increase more subsidy. And that is in direct conflict with the ongoing increase in construction cost. But we're still early at this stage of the proposals. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions on any of our Ddnp proposals.
Mayor Pro Tem, you seen the hands raised?
No, ma'am, and I'm gauging it.
All right, I will continue on and work on bringing this to a close. So I just want to go over a few programs that we have going on. A Fresh Start, this was our effort at working with our residents to avoid evictions and make sure that no one would be evicted based on their inability to pay rent. This, of course, took on new meaning during the pandemic. During that time, we brought on 6 new staff members, which we call the Housing Stability Team. This was paid for out of some of our CARES Act and other pandemic-related funding that we received. We were able to bring on these individuals, and they worked as hard as they could on trying to get our residents to either apply for funding that existed or work with some of our other partners out there. Now that we've moved into another phase, we'll have now 3 permanent positions that will continue to work in that capacity. Those individuals worked very hard over that period of time to do outreach, to let people know about funding that was available either through the county's emergency rental assistance program or the city's emergency rental assistance program. They did emails, phone calls, text messages, mailings, door knocking, social media, everything you can think of to try to get residents to take full advantage of those programs that were available. We also reached out to various community partners who have relationships with our residents, asking them to also encourage people to apply to those programs and or to be in touch with DHA so that we'd be able to keep folks from being placed in a situation where they were going to be filed for eviction. We had, during the pandemic period, about half of our public housing households who had become behind in their rent. In February of this year, that number had increased to over 700 families, or I should say, it kind of gotten back to 700 families. It was around 700, it dropped a little and it went back to that number. It has fluctuated throughout the pandemic. Excuse me. We continue to push on our outreach, encouraging our residents to continue to apply for available funding. So this will follow as just a overview of how residents did do who needed assistance. For the county's program, ERAP 1, there were 306 families that applied for funding. Well, I should say 306 families that received funding and amounts of $578,000. For the city's ERAP 2 program, we are not as clear with where we are with that because we're still waiting to get data from the city's contractor. But we had 286 families that did apply. So far, we received over $37,000 in rent that's owed. But we estimate that those 286 families have applied for at least $451,000 of what is owed. So in addition to that, we worked very hard with yet another tool, which is a repayment agreement that will allow residents to be in compliance with their lease by agreeing to pay back what they owe over a period of time. So we had 431 rental agreements. You remember I came to you all and talked a little bit about this at a work session that when we were very concerned about the number of people that had not been in touch with us or had applied for any funding. We were successful in getting 431 families to enter into repayment agreements, and that repayment agreement amount is over $767,000 of what families owe of outstanding rent. With that said, we now have only 11 families that at the end of last month that were at risk of facing eviction. We'll continue to work with those 11 families to see that we can avoid that, but that is a significant improvement over the hundreds of families that we were talking about back in February. Just to break down a little bit more about how the repayment agreements shake out. What you see here are the repayment agreements in terms of the total amounts that people have agreed to pay back over a period of time. So 25% of the folks owe less than $500 in total. About another 26% of the folks owe between $500 and $1,000. Another 23% owe between $1,000 and $2,000. And the remaining 25% combined is owing more than $3,000 in outstanding rental payments. Just to break this down in terms of how they're going about doing those rental payments, 82% of those families are paying less than $50 a month towards that repayment. And the remaining balance goes up from $50 additional per month on up, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when your average rents are $249, that's 20% more that those $249 a month renters are having to pay to bring their balances down. We are going to continue to work with our residents. We have another phase of Fresh Start that we're going to be launching soon that hopefully will be able to help with some of that and see that our families can reduce the overall amounts that they owe. We'll have more on that in the future. And lastly, I wanted to show just the time frame associated with how long it's going to take for someone to pay this back, at least the time frame in which they made these repayment agreements. So you see between 26% of the people are paying over the course of a year, and they go up from there. A good portion of them are between 2 and 4 years. Also a significant amount are above 5 years. So this is not something we think is sustainable, and we're going to work with our families to see how we would be able to help them reduce this overall repayment so that it's better managed and easier for them to deal with given their current rental obligations. Next, I'm going to move on very quickly to home ownership. We have a great partnership with Habitat for Humanity. DHA had 37 lots as a result of the Hope 6 program from 15 plus years ago. We were able to partner with Habitat to come up with a way in which they would then develop those sites and allow those families to have home ownership for the first time. We're very excited that the Laurel Street site, which is across the street from Edgemont Elms. If you have not had a chance, please take a drive down Laurel Street between Angier and Main Street and look at the great development that has been done there for the single family houses. This is the second site, which is in the Franklin Village area. That's another 17 homes that are being built there. 15 of those houses are remaining for final inspection, 3 of which have already started their framing. The entire 37 houses are expected to be completed by the end of this year. The average home cost is $185,000. These are 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses, usually at minimum. The home prices range from $115,000 to $235,000. And the average income of these new homeowners last year for that section that's over by Edgemont Elms there on Laurel Street, the average income was just over $31,000. And so far this year, the average income is a little over $40,000 for those new home buyers. So we're very excited about the partnership we have with Habitat and being able to get some of our families into homeownership positions. Jobs Plus is next. This is a 4-year grant program at McDougal Terrace. McDougal Terrace was the only qualified property based on the HUD guidelines. There are a certain minimum number of units, and McDougal Terrace at 360 units was the only property that qualified. That's why they're the only ones that had this particular grant. The grant period began in February of last year, and it runs through January of 2025. We must enroll 80% of all work-able adults, or 282 of those adults. The reward for someone being a part of this program is that if you gain employment as a part of this program, we will freeze your rents throughout your employment. So instead of rents, typically what happens is you get a job, your rents will go up commensurate with 30% of your income. With Jobs Plus program, however, you have something called an income disregard, and that means that those rents will not in fact go up, which means more of that income remains with that household. In addition, there is a number of training programs that we have with several community partners, many of the names that you know, such as Step Up Durham, the city's Workforce and Economic Development Office, and many, many more, who will work with those residents from everything from just basic skills in terms of resume writing and interviewing to actually doing some sector-based training. So we're very excited about how Jobs Plus is working out. And a comparison of year over year here, you can look at how we've seen some improvements in areas related to the Jobs Plus program. For example, the average income for a Job Plus participant is $13 an hour. The percentage of unemployed residents in McDougal Terrace as a whole has dropped by 11%. And our earned income overall for McDougal Terrace has more than doubled. So let me talk a little bit about that. So you look at this last row where you see in 2021, the average amount of earned income was only $27,030, which means this is income from wages and employment. That number has more than doubled in this month, as of the first of this month. is more than double. And again, this is averaging the entire community, those who are working, those that aren't. So that's a pretty good start for our first year of this program. We certainly want to see those wages go higher. We want to see more people working in sector-based jobs, but this is a pretty good start. We're excited about how the program is going so far. Not at all satisfied, but we're at least excited about the start that we're having here. And lastly, the Connect Home program. This is a fantastic partnership with DHA, the city, and Duke University. This is an Obama-era program that was targeting public housing communities to make sure that we could close that digital divide of internet access. We are one of the original, I believe it was 39 cities that were selected in 2015. And the program was great, it just had no money. So it wasn't until 2020, with great assistance from the city, particularly our now city manager, committed to making sure that our families in public housing would have access to high-speed internet. And of course, you all recall in that first year of the pandemic, folks were at home having to try to do school virtually, but struggling with having quality internet service. So over 1,200 students are going to benefit from this program. Right now, the sites that you see completed are Maureen, Daymar, McDougall, Cornwallis, Oxford, Laurel Oaks, Hoover, and Goley Point. Right now, all of those communities have free high-speed Wi-Fi access at their homes. By the end of this month, Club Boulevard and Edgemont Elms should also be fully online. And then the future sites are all of our development sites that we have, plus Price Steel Place, are all going to be a part of this program going forward. We are hoping that we can expand this to even more, such as the Hope 6 sites that we have. The president had made the wireless access in public housing communities a part of his budget. We're still waiting to see what the ultimate outcome of this is going to be in terms of what funding is available so that we can continue to expand this program so that each and every one of our DHA families will have free Wi-Fi access. So a little bit of conversation about funding needs. We know, and it's not a secret, that as we're looking to do development activities and we're seeing these tremendous construction costs, in order for us to be able to meet those gaps of construction cost increases alone, that's going to be a challenge for us. If we're going to want to see greater affordable units, it's going to be a challenge for us because the only way you can get those greater affordable units is by having more subsidy in the project. So those are two big obvious things that are serious funding needs for us. We're going to continue to press. We were at one point very optimistic that with Build Back Better, there would be a whole lot of funding that would be available for housing authorities that'll allow us to significantly advance some of this work. But as you all know, this never came to pass. There is another version of my understanding of that out there somewhere, but I don't know if I'm optimistic that it'll see the light of day in terms of getting approved. So without that being in place, it's going to be a challenge. As was mentioned by the Community Development Department, we applied for the Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Grant. That will be a huge boost for us for the Liberty and Main Street site. It'll be about $35 million if we receive that grant. That will help tremendously in our affordability issues, both in terms of filling the gap and in terms of us being able to increase our affordability at some of those sites. The repairs, we talked a little bit about that. We know that based on what our capital funding is right now, we get about $3 million a year that we can apply towards major capital repairs. So that's $15 million over the next 5 years. We know that's not going to be enough for all of our sites. So we're ultimately going to have to prioritize what work we do at what sites for that $15 million. Again, barring any additional increases that come in, but we're basing it on the numbers that we know we get right now. We'll ultimately need to move to the 4% tax credit strategy for the renovation of many of our sites, which has always been part of our plans. Sites like Hoover, scattered sites, Club Boulevard, those are ideal for that 4% tax credit strategy. But we also think some of the other sites, such as Cornwallis and Oxford Manor, are also prime for a 4% tax credit strategy. But all of that work will be coming in the coming year to make clear determinations on how we can have a more permanent fix as opposed to the $15 million 5-year fix to some of the issues that we face in those communities. And then lastly, this one is a bit far off and potentially an issue, but this is looking way down the road, given what's happening with construction costs and delays in construction, potentially having to bring on more consultants to help in moving our development deals forward. Potentially could be a problem if some of our development deals, which we have development fees coming in, which we'll use for that going forward. If that doesn't come to pass, then that'll be one of the challenges that we also are likely to face. So with that, I will pause here and end my formal presentation and see what questions or additional feedback that you all may have.
Wow, that was a lot of great information. Mr. Scott, for me, I would appreciate having the opportunity to look at some of your charts a little closer.
I will make this available to you. Absolutely.
And I'll open the floor for council questions. I know that Councilwoman Johnson has joined us, I believe, and we'll start with those questions first, and city officials if they may have questions, and we'll finish up with any of those with DHA and any others in the audience. So Mayor Pro Tem, if you could help me monitor that, and
Yes,
we'll
ma'am.
move to, I guess this moves us into our discussion phase as well, which is the next on our agenda with our city council members and our commissioners.
Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll get kicked off with a couple of things. Mr. Scott, good afternoon. First off, good to see you. And again, to all of the board and all of our residents and citizens that are watching us. First off, Anthony, if you don't mind, do a little, for the sake of folk watching, and I know this is being archived as well, I want to demystify a little bit the process that's going on around McDougal Terrace and the repositioning of McDougal Terrace. And there's a perception, and it was alluded to earlier, that based upon some of the money and the actions the city took when McDougal Terrace, when we were addressing the carbon monoxide issues in McDougal Terrace and had to house a lot of people while that work was being done, there was a perception that there is a perception among some that this repositioning is now part of that continuum. When I wanted to be very clear that when the city was spending that money, we had no idea that the feds were going to come in and order this. And that goes to the point. Talk a little bit about how that order came about in this disposition, because there are some that seem to think that the city had more to do with that than we actually did in terms of ordering, the plan to come about at the end of the year, and then a year from that, folk having to be out. So when you talk about repositioning, would you talk about the federal government's role and position in that relative to local players? That's my first question. If you just give you an opportunity to kind of demystify that.
Sure. No, unfortunately, this was a very hands-down decision by HUD. We pushed back on a lot. There was a lot more they actually asked for, and we pushed back on this. And they were insisted, though, that we take the McDougal Terrace community out of our public housing inventory. I think it would be good to have a conversation with HUD to kind of talk more about fully their rationale around that. But their position was that I'm partly assuming here, given the issues with the property, they wanted to see us have McDougal Terrace out of their public housing inventory more quickly. And frankly, a part of that is because there's been so much about McDougal Terrace in the news, and certainly HUD sees that all the time. And so they're kind of, hey, what's going on with this property? What needs to be done with that? We had always talked about that we want to reposition our entire portfolio and get out of the public housing program anyway, because it is not doing housing authorities any service because of the issues of funding, when you get it, how you get it. That's why we wanted this shift over to the Rad program, which is based more on the Housing Choice Voucher platform, which gets more consistent funding. You have, in some cases, higher rents and things of that nature. So we had always planned to have a repositioning of all of our public housing. In some cases, that would mean kind of what we've done in the downtown area. In other cases, it would mean more like Maureen and Daymar Court, where we're doing renovation work. HUD's insistence is you figure out what you're going to do, but you need to get it out of public housing inventory and give us a plan in the next year as to what that's going to be. We felt that that was a bit heavy-handed, but you know, HUD has the right to demand these sorts of things of a housing authority. We pushed back and said, you know, for example, they said they want this to be done in 2 years. And we said, well, I don't know that it can be done in 2 years because we need to figure out what it means to do it. And what we agreed to is we provide them a plan in 1 year. They're saying that we have to be out of that public housing, off that public housing program in 2 years, but included in that is that we submit the plan, they then have to approve that plan, and then we have time in which to begin the work around development of that plan. So like anything, we've got to look at what are the costs of trying to do the renovations of the site. Does it make sense to do renovations or does it make sense to do rebuilding? And if we're going to do rebuilding, how do you do that? Do we do it in sections? Do we do it in parts? Do we just move everybody out and start from there? These are all things that we actually have to go through a process of figuring out. Just like with the Ddmp, it took us over a year to come up with a plan for how we look to reposition each of those projects. And here we are, 3+ years later, and we're still working through that process of how we are able to turn those developments into new developments. In our case of downtown, where we're going to tear down and rebuild everything except for the J.J. Henderson site.
I think that's a very useful primer, and thank you for that. I think part of the issue and the challenge has been in the public space is the language and some of the nomenclature, because some folk here get it out of the public housing inventory, and some folk have heard that in perpetuity, like get it out, never to return. Therefore, we can sell the land, or therefore it'll become part of NCCU's new athletic complex. You've heard the things that are swirling around. Sure. So when we say things like get it out of, that does not mean it's forever gone. There's going to be housing there, correct? And there's going to be, it may be mixed income, it may be, and all the folk that were there will have the right, federally mandated right to return there and live there. If you would just kind of unpack that, get it out of the public housing inventory term and kind of break that down for lay people that are watching, what that actually means. Because some folk here think it means it's gone forever.
Right, I'm glad you make that distinction. When we talked a lot about RAD in the very beginning of the Ddmp process, we talked about the RAD program, which is rental assistance demonstration, would allow housing authorities to switch. When we talk about getting out of public housing, we mean where the money comes from. Just like I showed you in the beginning of the presentation, there are 3 different assistance programs: public housing, housing choice voucher, and affordable housing. They all get funded by separate buckets of money. The public housing program has typically, in the last 30+ years, been woefully underfunded, both in terms of how they provide money for the ongoing maintenance and operations, and as I've talked about in this presentation, how you fund the capital needs of that property over time. Historically, when you look at, I think over the last 30 years, there's been a reduction of the capital fund by about 60 to 70%. So that's how Congress has de-invested in public housing. The voucher program and the funding that comes through that, on the other hand, has been consistently funded at 99 to 100% over the same time period. So if we're moving from the public housing subsidy to now the voucher subsidy because we use the RAD program, now we have more consistent funding, and funding that's actually pegged to the market. Because remember, vouchers are supposed to be based on the rents of a particular area, in this case, Durham. And so that helps determine what those rents will be and ultimately what your subsidy will be that you get from that. So yes, you're correct. We're getting McDougal out of the public housing program. We're still going to have the 360 or 346 units that are McDougal in some capacity.
And again, to address some people's concerns, when we say at some capacity, I mean, what you were paying before this redevelopment occurred, when it's rebuilt, will you still be able to live there at that level, or at that expense, based upon if your income hasn't changed, provided all of the other factors remain the same?
So there are some key tenets to the RAD program. One is that we have to replace every unit that we tear down. And when we talked about the Ddmp earlier, 447 units is what existed on those sites. We're going to replace all 447 of those units. And I didn't talk about this, but we've committed to making sure those units stay in that downtown area. We're not going to move them out to the edges of the county or something like that. It was important that we have those units remain in downtown because that's where they've always been.
Mm-hmm.
So with the RAD program, you're required to replace those units on a 1-for-1 basis and like bedroom sizes. So you can't take a 4-bedroom and make it into a 1-bedroom, right? It has to be like bedroom sizes. Rents remain based on 30% of your income. That has always been the case. That will remain the same. So rents can't go up just because it's a new building. No, that designated subsidized unit is still going to be based on that person's income. And one real critical thing, you can't be rescreened. So if you are eligible for public housing now, you'll be eligible for that unit whenever you come back or wherever you go to. So we can't say, oh, well, you know, we're going to rescreen you now and we find out something different that we didn't know before. So now you're not eligible. That can't happen either. Those are some very, very key tenets to the RAD program. And this frankly was built into the law of RAD because of some of the things that happened with the Hope 6 programs and the Choice Neighborhoods programs and things like that. They made sure that those types of mistakes could not happen in the future.
Thanks for that, Anthony. And that's what I've been telling folk. And I thought it was really important for you to put that on the record here today in the presence of the council and the presence of folk watching and listening. It's archived now. So, you know, for posterity's sake. Finally, one quick question I'm going to get out of the way of my colleagues, pivoting a little bit to, you know, I get a lot of constituent emails about the timeliness in responding to repair requests. And I heard you talk about staffing challenges earlier and during the pandemic. And so when a resident needs pipe work done or something done, they call and put in a request for repairs to be done in their unit. What happens? After that request is made, talk to me about staffing, how it's prioritized. You know, what could possibly impact those requests going, you know, this is anecdotal, but I've been to some of these units, so I believe some of those requests going for long periods of time being unanswered. Talk about the challenges and the process that occurs once a request is made for service in a residence unit.
Right. So I talked a little bit earlier about how we now have one phone number in which you call in for a work order, as opposed to you call your particular management office. And that was based on a lot of feedback we had from residents that said they put in requests for work orders, but they didn't get work order numbers. They don't know what happened. People call, said, you know, I put in a request, and then they'll say, oh, we don't show anything in the system. So we've eliminated all of that doubt by creating this one call line. It's administered by a third party. When a person calls in, they get a work order number so they can track it. And we don't have the same sort of challenges that we had before about inaccuracies. So now what you have is a work order system that captures that. That work order is then submitted to that particular property manager to be assigned to someone to get the work done. Prioritization is such that there are certain health and safety issues that have to be addressed. There's something called an emergency work order that has to be addressed within 24 hours. So it might be something like a water leak or, you know, something like that. Those have to get addressed in 24 hours. Routine work orders are also prioritized in terms of, you know, emergency, urgent, and then sort of a standard work order. Our goal is to make sure that we have all work orders completed within no more than a 30-day period, preferably less than that, but we're at least sticking to the 30-day period right now. And that's where I reported, where we said, so far what we're seeing is that we're able to tackle these work orders with the increased staffing that we've had, with the vendor that we're using to be able to address those work orders in timely ways now that we weren't doing, you know, a year or so ago. I should mention that our work orders are up now by, when you look at first quarter of 2021 versus first quarter of 2022, we're seeing a 22% increase in the number of combined work orders between emergency and non-emergency. So
you said 22%?
22%.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's it. I just
Okay.
That last point is that we have seen an increase in the number of work orders that we received from last year this time. So we know that more residents are reporting them. And we're also able to track that more of them are getting done. So one
Thank
thing
you.
I'll say is that for residents who might have a work order, any work order that you know needs to get done, do not hesitate to call and get that work order placed. Even if it was something from a year or two ago, call and make sure that that work order gets placed now, so it gets in our system and we can track that work order. The one thing that I didn't talk about is that there's something called a UPCS inspection, all the alphabet soup. Basically, it's an inspection that's done, that should be done once a year, where we can go into each unit and inspect that unit. And based on that inspection, but it's been done by a third party, not our staff, but a third party. Based on that inspection, then we generate work orders. And so we should be able to capture those things that we see showing up in those annual inspections by HUD. So because of the pandemic, we weren't able to do those. And honestly, we weren't doing it very well prior to, but this is part of what we want to move to, is getting these UPCS inspections done. And that'll be able to identify things that residents might not even call about. One of the things that we've seen in some of the inspection reports is that there are things that we're not going to know if we're not in a unit. If we only go in a unit once a year. And of course, we haven't been in many units on a routine basis because of the pandemic. But there are some things that we simply don't know about unless they're being reported by a resident. The UPCS inspection helps us capture those things. But it's important that residents let us know if there's something that is broken, from the last time that we were in there, so that we can get those items repaired.
All right, thank you, Mr. Director, to you and your entire team. I got some other queries. I'll follow up with an email subsequent to this meeting. That's all, Madam Mayor. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn to other members of the council for any questions they may have. All right. Turn to any other city officials at this point if you have any questions. I think it was a lot of information to take in, so we have to kind of digest some of it.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Johnson, I see your hand raised.
Madam Mayor, there are a few questions in the chat that if folks from DHA wanted to take on, that would questions from residents.
Okay. Let's see. Mayor Pro Tem, you want to try to field those for us?
Yes, ma'am. I see a question from Raquel Williams-Jones. Does the Job Plus program allow for residents to open small businesses? And also, what is DCH doing about Section 3 as it relates to the redevelopment? Do we have any numbers on employment, training, and contracting for low-income persons?
Okay, on the first question, I don't think that having a small business will exclude you from being part of the Jobs Plus program. The point is that anyone who, they want to encourage residents to get to work and support them. So whether you have a small business or you're working for someone, I don't think that makes a difference. But certainly we can follow up with that by talking to our Jobs Plus staff folks to go through the details of that. On respect to the second question about Section 3, we are working in conjunction with the Office of Workforce and Economic Development to kick off some efforts around Section 3. We've done some of that previously, but not as robustly as we wanted. Primarily, it's been a question of staffing. We did have some outreach. We had a program where we had some residents who were looking to do work at the developments. We had one person who actually landed a job, which we were excited about, but since has left that position. But we are, part of the funding from the city was to bring in a position that would help with the Section 3 hiring. We have just received, in the last day or so, we just received that MOU that will allow us to kick that off full speed. And lastly, I'll just mention this, that we are also doing a partnership with the Triangle Apartment Owners Association to work on being able to hire some of our DHA residents. They're going to actually work directly, they're going to be recruiting directly in our public housing communities. I believe that'll be kicking off in another few weeks or so.
Thank you for that. From the city's side, it probably is worth just reiterating here that there were goals set out and identified when we were doing the marketing and campaigning around the affordable housing bond, not just contractually for MWBE, women and minority-owned firms, but actual employment opportunities as well. So that was a big part of the push. From Sonia Laurie, do residents have to qualify for RAD converted properties based on a developer qualification? I think you may have spoken to that earlier.
Right. No, they're not. The RAD qualifications exist to protect our public housing residents. So those are already in place. They are actually codified in law.
And finally, from Raquel Williams-Jones again, what happens to the voice of residents through their local resident councils? Are these rights and authority being transferred and protected under the RAD conversions?
So the RAD conversions they're still resident councils that can exist. They're just not under the same format as the public housing program because you're no longer in that program. It's just like the voucher program has a different type of process than does the public housing. So that is one thing that does change, but there's still opportunities for residents to become organized with those RAD developed units. But it's not the same as the public housing program.
To the spirit of her question, though, how is it different? Because her question seems to be about empowerment, the ability of,
right.
of residents. How would it substantively be different?
So there's a whole, I guess I'm going to call it like a bundle of rights associated with the public housing program that goes away when you come out of that program. So I try to iterate those. So, for example, resident councils are required to be set up in public housing. There is a resident council, not the same formal name. And I don't know if it's resident council name or something slightly different, but they still have to fund the organized resident councils within those RAD buildings, but they don't have the same rights that you would under public housing. That is true. So, for example, if there was, if you wanted to take on redevelopment of something, you have to consult with the public housing residents in a typical public housing community. You don't have that same protection in a RAD development. So that is true. There are some changes there. And I don't know all this off the top of my head, but I'll have to come back to you guys and answer that in more detail because it's a little sloppy here. But I will have to come back to show those differences and those distinctions. I'll make sure I can get that to everyone.
And finally, from her again, not so much a question here, but by way of editorial, she says residents are losing their rights as private investment comes into play. HUD is not ensuring that these rights are protected. Families are stressed with moving. These rights should carry over, but no one is managing this process, unfortunately. And that's the last comment question. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but I think it's important.
You know, anytime you're changing, there's going to be some stress involved. But I think that as we are looking to build properties that are going to last for the years to come, it's got to be necessary. And this is the only tool in the tool chest that HUD provides for us that allows us to get there. We're trying to build structures, financial structures that allow these properties to be able to be properly maintained on a day-to-day basis, as well as having a capital set aside that allows the repairs that are needed, the big ones in 10, 15, 20 years, that doesn't exist today. So yes, there are some trade-offs. We as housing authorities aren't thrilled about some of the things that are built into this law, but overall it's a much better process than what we have now with public housing, where these buildings are literally falling apart because we don't have enough funding to maintain them the way we should.
All right. Thank you for that, Madam. And the final comment you might want to hear, she thinks you're doing a great job, and this is a difficult position to manage. So with that, that was her final comment. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that's it in terms of chat or questions, if you want to return to colleagues.
All right. I want to check back in with our chair of the commission, Dan. If you have any comments here, we're coming to a close. I do think that we need to have a regular scheduled meeting. We go out on the council, maybe we'll talk about it, but talk about maybe at least once a quarter. Just begin to think about that, since we have so many changes and some of us are still on the learning curve, and we may need to have some deeper dives into the differences between public housing and affordable housing and the like, so that we'll just kind of, everybody's on the same page. So let's think about that, but I'll turn it back over to you since we're coming down to the final 10 minutes to see if you or anyone else has any comments.
I just want to say that I think it's been helpful to have this common information between all of us. Our board, and I want you to know this, is very engaged in this. You noticed all 7 folks were here to begin with. Some had mandatory training, had to leave, but they are, we have 3 days a month that we participate in meetings, and they are very engaged. And I'm excited about, what I'm most excited about is the plans that we have, which Mr. Scott shared with you, and the partnership we have with the city. This could not be done. There's no question that if it were not for the city's funding, our program would be very much scaled back. We'd be lucky to be replacing 1-for-1, much less the numbers that we're seeing now are 447 to 2,500 part of the plan. So I'm excited. The board's excited, and I really do want to ask you, Madam Mayor, if we can't do this on a regular basis, at least quarterly, if not every 6 months, because it's important. The good questions asked today shows that we really haven't been doing as good a job of educating everybody about rules, which are somewhat complicated, but we can do that given this kind of opportunity. So thanks. I want to open it up to any other commissioner who has a comment or question they'd like to make in this last few minutes.
Mr. Chair, before you do that, Madam Mayor, I think Councilor Caballero was seeking recognition.
Yes. Councilwoman Caballero, and welcome back.
Thank you. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated this present. There was just a lot of really important information shared. We all have our responsibilities as liaisons to different boards, and this is important information. So I appreciate the opportunity to hear everything. I do hope we do schedule something more often. I think it is another opportunity for residents. Like you shared really incredible and important information, Mr. Scott, and I think some really key improvements, especially around work orders and systems that have been put in place that I think benefit a lot of our DHA residents. I'm happy to hear it. I think it's another opportunity for residents to hear about prospective changes and their opportunities to get involved. And it's just, dialogue and communication is always so helpful. So thank you. And I look forward to other opportunities like this.
I definitely think that we need to make sure that we meet at least quarterly. So I ask that you all we'll try to see if we can figure out what dates are good for the council. And hopefully this date, it seems to work for all of us, I think, except for Councilman Williams, who's out of town. But it could be a date that works, which is the first Monday. The second Monday or the third Monday? Third Monday of the month. So let's see if that'll work for us at least quarterly.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Is there anything else that would claim our attention for this body? All right, well, we thank you all for your time today. And Mr. Scott, that was excellent presentation. Also, the same to Mr. Johnson. And we will be in touch. I know that we have some other things that we need to discuss, and we will be in touch further. So everybody have a great holiday on Friday. Stay safe and well out there, and we'll see you all soon. Take good care.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.